40 years ago, a debut album arrived that would quietly rewire what pop music was allowed to be. But to understand it, you have to go back 5 years earlier, London, 1981. Two strangers meet in an electronics shop on the King's Road. One is a music journalist, completely obsessed with pop. The other is an architecture student, quiet, precise, more comfortable around keyboards than people. Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe. They didn't look like a band, they didn't sound like one either, and for a few years there was very little to suggest they ever would. The song that changed everything had already existed for 2 years before anyone noticed. Western Girls was first recorded in 1984 with American producer Bobby Orlando. Released, largely ignored, quietly shelved. Then producer Stephen Hague got hold of it, stripped it back and rebuilt it into something cooler and more deliberate. It went to number 1 in the UK, and then number 1 in the US. What made it work wasn't just the production, but its outlook. While most pop in 1986 was still chasing glamour and escape, Western Girls was doing something closer to urban anthropology. Class tension, city geopolitics, the quiet menace of a night out that might tip sideways. Eastern boys and Western girls, simple on the surface, quietly unsettling underneath. Pop music, it turned out, could be intelligent without making a fuss about it. Their debut album arrived in March 1986, and even the title is a small, perfectly executed joke. It's called Please. As in, can I have the Pet Shop Boys album, please? The cover follows the same logic, almost entirely white, one small photograph, absolutely no spectacle. In a decade that had essentially made excess its entire personality, this was a very deliberate refusal to play along. It's worth pausing on that because it wasn't simply modesty, it was a statement. At a time when artists were building elaborate, loud visual identities, the Pet Shop Boys responded with a near blank white square. They were saying something about the nature of pop, about what gets prioritized and why. Restraint, handled with this much precision, becomes its own kind of provocation. Spend some time with the record, and the surface begins to crack open in interesting ways. Opportunities sounds like a bright, punchy pop song when it's actually a fairly forensic take on Thatcherite ambition. Suburbia finds something quietly threatening in net curtains and cul-de-sacs, the kind of unease the polite society prefers not to name. Love comes quickly, then wrong foots you entirely by being genuinely unexpectedly tender. Neil's journalism background is all over the lyrics. Observational, slightly detached, interested in people without being particularly sentimental about them. Chris's architectural instincts express themselves in his production. Structured, considered, every element earning its place. The final effect is pop music that watches the world rather than performing for it. It doesn't ask you to feel a certain way. It simply shows you something and lets you draw your own conclusions. What ties the whole record together is the sound itself. Tight, fully electronic, and controlled to a degree that felt almost clinical by the standards of the time. Every synth line, every program beat is precise, considered, and intentional. While much of the decade was leaning into live band energy and rock-inflected production, the Pet Shop Boys embraced the machine, and they made the machine feel like the only choice. In doing so, they were quietly sketching out a new template for pop, electronic, ironic, emotionally restrained, yet still capable of landing someone real. Alongside Neil's deadpan delivery, it didn't sound like a reaction to the present, but a preview of what was coming next. Dance music, synth-pop, the cooler end of 90s electronica. You can hear the blueprint being laid down, even if nobody had quite built the house yet. Please became one of the defining debuts of the 1980s, precisely because it quietly expanded what pop and pop stars were permitted to do. Intellectual without being inaccessible, emotionally restrained without feeling empty, commercially successful while still unmistakably cerebral. Pet Shop Boys made something precise, a little ironic, and completely self-possessed, and then waited, with typical British stoicism, for the world to catch up. And boy it did. It's a very Pet Shop Boys way of going about things, understated, considered, slightly ahead of the curve, and polite enough to never mention it. 2026 marks 40 years since some of the most influential albums of the 1980s were released. Join us next time as we revisit another classic from the decade and let us know in the comments which albums we should cover.